Hello, and welcome to another episode of Movies, they're pretty good. I'm your host, Travis Dudding, and today we got another one of the scariest movies ever made. That's what it was considered to be for the longest time. We have 1973's The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin. Figured this would be, not only is this one of my favorite movies, but somewhat topical since the sequel just came out, like the new sequel that pretends that there were no other sequels before it. So let's get right into it. We open in northern Iraq or Iraq. We see some archaeological digs. We see Max von Sydow, who we'll learn is a priest named Father Lancaster Merrin. And during this dig, he finds a small little statue, like a figurine of like a demonic face. And well, later, they never say it outright. So I think this is something that came in like one of the sequels that I haven't seen. But the demon's name is Pazuzu, and so he sees a sculpture of that, and then it kind of seems like shaken about it too, and we don't really know why. We see him in an office, talking to somebody and talking about how he's going to be leaving soon, and they hate to see him go, but he has something he has to do. But what's interesting is while he's in the office, the pendulum on the clock stops all of a sudden, and it's not really, you know, nothing explained. Just like it's just there to give you this sense that like something's not right and that there's evil afoot. I guess I know it sound like a Mermaid Man, but whatever he has to do, he goes to back to the archaeological site, and he goes and finds this like a full statue of the demon Pazuzu. That matches the little figurine he found. It's up on a hill, and like as he's looking at it, there's like dogs fighting viciously in the background and stuff, and there's like the music is causing like a lot of tension and everything. So, but it's just like this shot of him like looking at it, and we see him and the statue in the same frame, and then it cuts away from Iraq and Father Merrin until much later in the film, and cuts to Georgetown in D.C. So right next to Washington D.C. It's weird. For the longest time, like I always thought that D.C. was just Washington D.C., but it makes sense. Like it is like a territory. It's smaller than all the states, but it makes sense that there would be more than one city in quotes there. But I have been there, and I have actually been to the house where they filmed this. Not like inside or anything, but it's on it's on Prospect Street in Georgetown, right around the corner from Georgetown Cupcakes, which I think had like a reality show on TLC for a while. Really good cupcakes. But every time I was over there, tried to kill two birds with one stone, get the cupcakes, and go look at the Exorcist house. We we see this is how we get introduced to the MacNeil family. The mother, Chris MacNeil, played by Ellen Burstyn. She is waking up. We see her like, well, not waking up, but she's going over like scripts in the morning because she's an actress, and she's as she's moving through the house in the early morning, she hears some noises coming from the attic, and she like tells the housekeeper slash cook, Carl, that there might be rats in the attic, and he's like, no, like the attic's clean, like there's no rats up there. And then she's like, well, just go check, please. That we meet the daughter, Regan, played by Linda Blair. The father seems to be out of the picture somewhat. They later say that he's in Europe, but I don't know if they're fully divorced or just separated, but there's some tension there, and it's a touchy subject, and he kind of seems to be pretty hands off from what we could tell. She has an assistant that's there. Her name's Sharon. Like I said, Carl, the housekeeper slash cook, and his wife. I forget her name. Yeah, they don't say it too often. They don't even say Carl too often, to be honest. But like I said, German immigrants. Well, Swiss, he says later. But it's that region of Europe. Like I said, tells Carl about the rats. Cut to her on set, filming at a college campus, presumably Georgetown. It's a big outdoor scene. There's like a protest for the Vietnam War as part of the scene and everything. We see the director, Burke Dennings. We see as she's talking to the director, there's a big crowd of people just watching the movie being filmed. And then this is where we see Father Karras for the first time, another one of our leads. As she's walking home from the set, we see that there's trick-or-treaters out, so it's Halloween day or Halloween night on this first day. As she's walking past the church, she notices Father Karras in there, and she's never met him at this point. She didn't notice him at the set or anything, but for whatever reason, she's just like visually drawn to him and just kind of like notices him, and not like in a creepy way, like, oh, like she's checking him out, but she just, for whatever reason, like fate intervened, and she happened to look to the side and notice him and watch him for a little bit and just seemed kind of intrigued and then moved on. She gets home and Regan's talking to her about her day, how she like rode horses and stuff. Then we cut to Father Karras at the subway station waiting to board. And here, as he's waiting for the train to pull up, there's a homeless man laying by a column and says, "Hey, Father, would you help an old altar boy out? Like, I'm a Catholic." And it's interesting because you assume like, oh, priest, he's gonna like help the needy and stuff, but he seems like put off by it, and not in a way like, oh, this gross bum or anything like that, but just in a like he sensed something was off with the guy. Like, so it's just an interesting look and an interesting exchange, and then like his eyes seem a little like glazy when the light from the subway's hitting him. Just an interesting scene. We see him in New York City. That's where he was taking the train to. In kind of like a rundown neighborhood. I don't want to say a bad neighborhood, but you could tell there's a lot of vandalism, a lot of buildings boarded up, and the car windows are broken and trash everywhere and stuff. And he's going to visit his mom, and that's where his mom lives. We gather that from a later conversation that he's trying to convince her to go stay in like a retirement home, someplace nice that he can pay for and put her up, and she won't be alone all the time. And she's like, no, like, this is my home. Like, this is where I live. I'm not going anywhere. Cut back to the MacNeil house. We're down in the basement, and Regan's finishing up like a clay sculpture that she made of like a bird. And Chris finds a Ouija board, and she's like, oh, hey, like, what, like, where'd this come from? And Regan says that she found it in the closet. And she's like, oh, well, do you know how to use it? She's like, yeah, like, here, I'll show you. And when they put it down and go to play with it, the little thing, I forget what it's called, the little triangle thing, but that moves like real quick over to the no, like flies out of Regan's hand and hits the no. And so that's interesting. And Regan says that the spirit that she's been talking to is named Captain Howdy, and she's trying to ask Captain Howdy some questions, and like, do you think my mother's pretty? And typical like preteen girl questions and stuff like that, of the time. And but then now the thing's not moving or anything. Next day we just get a short scene of Chris on the phone. She's on the phone with the operator trying to get a call to Europe to Regan's dad, and she's super angry, she's frustrated, and she like says out loud like that he can't even call his own daughter on her birthday. And we see that Regan is eavesdropping on all of this in the other room, and she seems bothered but also not surprised. Next morning, like they don't say like what time it is, but very early in the morning, I'm assuming, Chris gets a call saying like, oh, we're gonna do this scene, we need you on set. And she's like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I just went to bed, like, but fine, like, okay, like I'll be there. And then as she's getting up out of bed, she realizes that Regan's in the bed with her, and she's like, hey, like, what are you doing here? And she says like, I couldn't sleep, my bed was shaking. And she's like, okay, like, it doesn't really put too much into it, and just thinks that maybe she was just having a nightmare or something. So gets up and goes to work and everything. Gets up like she's going to get ready to go to work. But as she's getting up, she hears the noises in the attic again. And so she's like, okay, this time I'm going to go check it out. So she pulls the thing down and grabs a candle and goes up the ladder to go check things out. She's going through there. The attic's dark. The light won't turn on. That's why she had to get the candle. And doesn't really see anything. No rats, obviously. She sees the rat trap, and it still has the cheese on it. So no rats in there. But right as she's getting back towards the door, the flame on her candle like magnifies like 10 times, and just like the flame just like shoots up towards the ceiling. And then Carl's there at the top of the ladder saying like, hey, like, everything okay? See, there's no rats, and then she's like, all right, whatever, like, I gotta get ready for work. Now we cut to a priest, not one we've seen before, and not like a named character in the movie, but he's a priest. Like, he's got some flower pots that he's gonna put out in the church, and kind of maybe just doing like a morning routine and everything. He puts one vase of flowers in one side of the church, and as he's walking over to the other side of the front part, not the stage, but you know what I mean, the altar, duh. So he puts it on the one side of the altar, and as he's walking over to the other, we see his face that he's noticing something. And then cut to the Virgin Mary statue that's been like completely desecrated. Like, there's like these like large bloody cones coming out of the breast and genitals, and just like obviously he's stunned and shocked and everything. And then it cuts away from that. Cut to Father Karras. He's back in New York, and he's talking with his uncle, and he's arguing with them, and he's in like a hallway. And we gather that he is upset with the uncle because the uncle put his mom in a psych ward, and it's like not like the best, not the cleanest, not the best one, and not the correct deal for her situation, because from what we've seen, there's nothing like mentally wrong with her. She just like her leg was hurt, and he didn't know what to do with her, so he just put her in like the cheapest place and everything like that. So Karras was pretty upset with that. goes in there to see her and everything, and she's upset, like, oh, Demi, like, why am I in this place? Like, why'd you put me here? And he's like, don't worry, like, we're gonna get you out and everything. We see another conversation with the uncle, and he's like, what? Like, you know, you could have paid for instead of being a priest, if you would have been a famous psychiatrist, then you could have put her up in a nice hospital and everything. And it's like who's got the money for that? You? Like, you don't have it. I don't have it. But either way, he pulls her out of there. We get like a quick shot of or a quick scene of him boxing. So he's like, you could tell that he's getting his frustrations out in the gym and everything. And he's boxing the bag and everything. Then we cut to a party at the MacNeil's house. We see that the director, Burke Dennings, is already a little drunk, and he's harassing Carl, the housekeeper, asking him like, oh, like, what is it you did for the Gestapo? Was it public relations? And he's just Carl's like, what are you talking about? I'm Swiss. And then he's like, oh, did you ever go bowling with Goebbels? And calls him a Nazi bastard. And just trying to like provoke him for whatever reason, like either he's drunk or, whatever. We see Chris talking to a friend of hers that's a priest, Father Dyer, and asks about Father Karras, and he's just like, hey, like, I've seen this priest a couple times out and about, like, what's the deal with him? And he's like, oh, like, he works with, he's like a psychiatrist, but also a priest. And so he does a lot of mental health stuff at the church. And he's like, actually, he had like he's having a pretty rough week. His mom just died. Apparently she had been dead for a couple days by the time someone found her. So it's a little confusing in the movie. I don't know if like something was cut from it. But it's also confusing in the director's cut, because I've seen both versions. For this viewing, I am doing the theatrical cut, but even in the director's cut, it's a little confusing, because you see the last time you see his mom is she's still in the hospital, and as far as I could tell, you don't outwardly hear Demi talk to a doctor. You don't see her leave the hospital, none of that. So you're just like, oh, she's in the hospital. He leaves, he's upset, and then she's dead, but she was dead in her own home for 5 days before anyone found her. So it's a little confusing. It's like, oh, okay, like, was the hospital in his head? Was like a way that I went down in my head, like a little rabbit hole, but then I just looked it up. And it's like, oh, okay, like, he did take her from the hospital. So it's just a few days later, not the next day. Like, so a few of the guests are starting to leave. We see Chris make sure Burke gets into a cab, because obviously he's way too drunk to drive. Oh yeah, at one point he does attack Carl, like, kind of like tackles him and stuff, and like provokes him to the point where it's like a fight. And that gets broken up. He gets sent home and everything. Then once the party's died down to where it's just a few people gathered around the piano as Father Dyer's playing the piano. They're just having a good time, and then Regan comes downstairs from bed in her pajamas, and she just kind of stands there watching everybody, and she's just like staring very intently, and they're like, Regan, like, honey, what's wrong? And then she just says, you're gonna die up there, and then starts peeing on the rug. And everyone's just like, okay, like, what's going on? Like, that's really weird. That's very ominous. It's very uncomfortable. And it's like, Regan, like, what's wrong? Like, and then gets her upstairs and gives her a bath and everything. Cut to Karras having a dream, and, well, nightmare. Bunch of different things in the dream. We see like a necklace falling, and there's like very little sound in the dream too. We see his mom coming up from up the stairs from a subway station out from under the ground. We see the dogs fighting from the Iraq scene. We see the white demonic face of Pazuzu that will come back a couple times, a lot more in the director's cut. We see the clock from the office as it's stopped in the also back in the Iraq scenes. And then Karras is like across the street, like trying to call for his mother, who seemingly can't hear him. And then she goes back down into the subway. So just a lot of eerie, ominous imagery that seems disconnected, but like disconnected in logic, but connected in feeling, if that makes sense. Now we cut to the hospital where, they're trying to figure out what's going on with Regan. She's like fighting with the nurses and the doctors, and she's screaming at them like, "You fucking bastards," and spits on the doctor and like all this stuff. And and I skipped a scene because before the Father Karras's dream, there's and after Chris gave Regan a bath and everything, she puts her back to bed, goes downstairs, and then then she hears like screaming like, "Mother, help me!" And she runs up into Regan's room, and her bed's like shaking like a lot, and so she like climbs onto the bed and everything, and it's still shaking with her on the bed, and that's why she's like, okay, like let's go get some tests done. What's going on. So after the whole, like when she's like cussing and screaming at the doctors and spitting on them, Chris is talking to a doctor in the hallway or in the office, I forget which one, and she's telling the doctor like, well, like the bed was shaking, like even with me on it. And he's like, "Oh, sometimes there could be like seizures and stuff like that," and just kind of like blowing off and not really listening to what she's saying. And he's like, "The problem's not with your bed. It's with her bed. It's with her brain, Yes, because the lesions in her brain made the whole fucking bed move up and down, But it's also one of those things. It's like if you don't see it, it's hard to believe it, But yeah, he thinks it's a lesion in the brain in the temporal lobe or frontal lobe, I forget. But either way, and sometimes that causes seizures. So let's do some more medical tests. So you're getting like different PET scan and CT scan and all that. Like they're doing everything, all the X-rays. Takes her back home. Ends up calling the doctors to the house, and as they get there, they go up into the room and they see her like flailing on the bed like violently. And so this is the first time they're like, oh, okay, it's more than just a seizure, but they're also still not fully convinced. And Regan's just screaming like as she's flailing, like, "It's burning, it's burning, it hurts, it hurts." Then she stops flailing and her head goes back and her eyes turn white and like her throat starts getting big as she's letting out this like primal growl, like, and like her throat like swells like super big and everything, like there's a bubble moving through it, Then she hops up on her feet and slaps the doctor and says, "Keep away, this hour is mine." And then she's like screaming like, "Fuck me, fuck me." Hits the doctor. Then it cuts away from that scene and they're out in the hallway and the doctors are like trying to say like, well, they compare it to like these feats of strength that she's doing to when a mother has like an adrenaline rush that allows her to lift a car off of her child or something like that. So they're still not like really getting what's going on. They're still pretty skeptical, even though basically seeing some stuff that would convince anybody, you know. So they take her in for more tests. The x-rays come back negative. There's nothing medically that they can see wrong with her. No lesion on the temporal lobe, nothing. So she's doctor's asking Chris if there's any drugs in the house, and she's like, no, like I don't even smoke weed out of the house, you know, so I don't do any of that stuff. Then we see her driving home, and while she's driving home at night, we see like a large crowd gathered, and there's ambulances and stuff, and these are at the bottom of a set of stairs that leads from the lower, I think Third Street up to Prospect Street, which is where their house is, and it goes like right next to the house. And like it's all there, like they didn't add these stairs or anything, like those are all there if you go there in person still. Super steep, super high stairs. And there's some kind of commotion, a bunch of people, ambulances and everything at the bottom of the stairs, but she doesn't seem to notice. Gets home, she's like calling for Sharon, and she doesn't seem to be home either. She's like, okay, like I left Regan with Sharon. Like, where the hell is she? She's looking around the house. Can't find her anywhere. She goes up to Regan's room. And as she's like moving through the house, the lights are flickering a bunch, like a weird amount. Gets up to Regan's room. It's all like freezing in there. The window's wide open, but Regan's asleep. So she goes and closes the window, goes back downstairs. Sharon comes home, and Chris is like, where the hell were you? And she's like, well, like, didn't he tell you? Like, didn't who tell me? And so she called Burke Dennings to watch Regan while she went to the pharmacy to get the Thorazine for Regan. But Burke's nowhere to be found, you know? And so like, okay, like where the hell is he? Then there's someone at the door, goes and answers the door, and it's one of Chris's friends, and he says, oh, I suppose you've heard. And heard what? And he's like, oh, Burke's dead. And then so like, okay, like, wait, what? And the guy's like, yeah, like he must have been drunk and fell down the stairs, and like by the time he the outside stairs that go down to Third Street, and that by the time he hit the bottom, his neck was broken, he was dead. And so Chris breaks down like, oh my god, like what's happening? She's freaking out. Her friend, her director, is dead. So now we cut to a hypnotism. So the psychiatrists have exhausted all medical possibilities and scientific possibilities. So they're trying to broaden it a little bit, you know. So they bring in a hypnotist, and they're hypnotizing Regan and asking her questions like, is there someone inside of you? And she says, sometimes. And hypnotist asks, like, can I speak to them? And she says, no, I'm afraid. But then the hypnotist says, like, all right, I'm speaking to the person inside of Regan. And then her like demeanor changes, and she starts to like kind of growl a little bit, and the demon, it like starts to emerge. Then he goes to ask some questions, and Regan like grabs him like I don't know if like she grabs his crotch, but grabs something between the legs and like squeezes really hard and like tackles the doctor to the ground and everything, and they pull her off, screaming and everything. Cut away from that to see Father Karras jogging on like a track, and there's someone watching him from the bleachers, and we find out this is Detective Lieutenant Kinderman, played by Lee J. Cobb, starts asking him questions, saying like, "Hey, like, what do you know about witchcraft?" And he's like, "Oh, I, wrote a paper on it from a psychiatric standpoint." And basically, the lieutenant thinks that the desecration of the church and Burke Denning's death may be connected, and also have something to do with witchcraft, something like that, like a black mass, something. This is where we find out that Burke Denning's head was completely turned around, like a complete 180. Like his head was facing backwards when they found his body at the bottom of the stairs. And Karras is like, geez, like, could that happen in the fall? And the Lieutenant Kinderman's like, it's possible, but very unlikely. So his hypothesis is that he might have, that something happened to him before he fell. Like his head was already turned around, or he was killed before he went down the stairs. Now we cut to a team of doctors, like all around a table talking to Chris, and just like, and she even like says like 88 fucking doctors and no one can find out what's wrong with my daughter. And someone finally says like, hey, like, do you have any religious beliefs? And she says no. And someone else asks like, what about your daughter? And Chris is like, what, like, where's this going? Like, what are you talking about? And someone speaks up and asks like, have you heard of exorcism? And talks about how like many cultures and religions have exorcisms. No one really does it anymore, but the Catholics still do it like in secret, but they're like kind of ashamed of it too. So after that whole conversation, we cut back to the house. She's in Regan's room checking on her, and she finds a cross under her pillow. And as she's finding this cross, we see Lieutenant Kinderman. He's out at the bottom of the stairs, just kind of surveying the crime scene. And in like a pile of leaves and dead grass and stuff, he finds the same Pazuzu head figurine thing that Father Merrin found in Iraq. So, but, obviously he didn't see the beginning of the movie, so he has no connection to that, but it's still something suspicious. He goes up the stairs, he knocks on the door and wants to talk to Chris, question her, ask her about Burke Dennings, asks if it was possible that someone else could have been in the room with them, a third person to like, kill him, turn his head around and throw him out the window, basically. So then pretty much right as the lieutenant is leaving, Chris kind of like takes a second, like there's a little silence for like a few moments, and then there's commotion upstairs and Regan screaming. There's a lot of like noise going on. She runs up there. There's opens the door. Like all the things from the wall and everything are flying around the room. All the furniture's moving. She then Regan grabs the. She grabs the crucifix that was under her pillow. She starts like violently masturbating with it. Like, not that you could see anything graphic, but there is like blood because it is like a rigid metal cross. And she's like saying like, let Jesus fuck you. And she's like saying that over and over again. And she grabs Chris's face and like shoves it into the blood and says like, lick me, lick me. And like her voice is like super deep because they took this like older woman who was a smoker and had this like raspy, deeper voice. And she did like most of the demon dialogue instead of Linda Blair. And Linda Blair would just have to like she would have to say it too, but they overdubbed her in the final product. Throws Chris to the floor. The dresser starts moving towards Chris and like it's about to crush her. Sharon and the housekeepers are running up to the room to like see what's going on and help. And then the chair goes and blocks the door and slams it shut. And then Regan's head does a complete 180 to look at Chris. And then in Burke Denning's voice in his English accent says, "Do you know what she did? Your cunting daughter?" And then, Chris screams and then cut to a new scene. Oh. We see Chris meeting Father Karras on a bridge. This is the first time they're actually like meeting each other. Starts to ask him questions like, what do you know about exorcism? And like, or how would I go about getting an exorcism? And he says like, well, first thing you'd have to do is find a time machine and go back to the 1800s. Like, we don't do that anymore now that we know about psychology and psychiatry. So he's very skeptical of the whole idea of an exorcism. But basically, so Chris is like, okay, like, well, let me show you what we're talking about here. Takes him to see Regan. He's talking to her. It says like, oh yeah, it's like, what can I do for you? She says to loosen the straps, and he's like, well, if you're the devil, then why couldn't you just loosen them yourself? And the demon says like, that would be too vulgar a display of power. And then as Karras is like moving through the room and has his back turned, she says in the voice of the homeless man from earlier, the exact same thing, like, won't you help an old altar boy out, Father? So he turns around and it's like, what are you doing? Like, and then Regan says, your mother is here with us, and then we want you to join her and stuff like that. And then vomits the famous like pea soup green slime all over him. And then cut to him in the basement with Chris, and she's cleaning his clothes for him, like after the vomit and everything, but they're like still talking about everything. He asks if as he's leaving, he asks if Regan knew that a priest was coming that day, and Chris said no. And then he asks, like, did you know that my mother passed away? And she said yes. And that then he's like, wait, like, did Regan know that though? And she's like, no, like, she doesn't even know about you. So he's a little more convinced now that since Regan, who had no idea that he was coming, that he had a mother that just passed away, was like talking about his mother being dead and in hell with them. So he comes back, presumably the next day. He's in there. Regan says, what an excellent day for an exorcism. And he's like, oh, like, you would like that? Like, that would mean you'd get like banished away from Regan. And she says like, no, like, it would bring us closer together. Like, what, like you and Regan closer together? And he says, no, you with us. So obviously this demon wants Father Karras to be part of their legion of demons that are inside Regan. He starts up a tape recorder to record this session and his conversation with Regan, because one of the deciding factors for the church to grant an exorcism is for there to be some sort of evidence, like her speaking in a a language that she's never studied or learned before, or having like multiple voices, like all this stuff. Like this is all evidence that would help the case to get an exorcism going. So he's starting to record her. She speaks a little Latin to him, but nothing too crazy, nothing too that you might pick up from common knowledge, from media, from books, whatever. Pulls out some holy water, he says, and she's like, "What's that?" He says, "Holy water," and then starts to like sprinkle it on her, and she's like, "It burns, it burns." Then like the voices start to get a little crazy, but you can't really understand like what she's saying, but she's like writhing and like in pain and everything. And he's recording everything she's saying. Then we get another conversation between Karis and Chris, and he's saying like, well, like I sprinkled this on Regan and she like reacted violently, and he's like, I told her it was holy water, but it's just tap water. And then Chris is like, well, what does that mean? Like, it mean, yeah, like, well, it doesn't help our case for an exorcism, but either way, he has that recording and everything that he's going to have analyzed later. But I think in like a last Hail Mary, Chris tells Father Karras her suspicion that it was Regan that killed Burke Dennings, and just that like threw him out the window and everything. So he's a little more like, okay, like that makes sense. I didn't want to think that, but you're probably right. He goes to analyze the tape. He has like a professional like analyzing and everything, and he's like, yeah, that's a language, all right, English. And he's like, what? What do you mean? Like, well, it's English played backwards or like spoken backwards. And he plays the tape in reverse, and this is where we can actually hear, understand what she's saying, and then we hear like there's like multiple voices, and there's like saying like let her die, and then starts calling Merrin and talking about a priest and stuff, and then Merrin. Then we see him in back at his apartment listening to it in reverse, and he's just listening and analyzing himself. And he gets a phone call, and he's like, oh, like I'll be right over. And we see him like rushing to the house, and Sharon lets him in, and they go upstairs, and he's like hey, like she says like I didn't know who to call, and I don't want Chris to see, but I think you need to see it. And takes her up to Regan's room, and first they put on like these heavy jackets and stuff because they get in there and like the room is like freezing cold, and even with the window closed, it's like you could see her breath in there, because like this evil is like making the room cold and sucking all the warmth out. And so she goes and like unbuttons her pajamas a little bit to show Regan's stomach, and there is like almost like scars or like coming from the inside of her skin the words "help me." And so like now Father Harris is like fully convinced at this point. We see him presenting the case to the higher ups and just kind of giving the background and everything. They tell him like, well, it makes sense, like it hits all the markers for an exorcism and everything, but I think we'll need someone with a little more experience. And Karras is like, yeah, like I understand. Then we see that higher up talking to another priest, and they're like, well, like I think that Karras should be a part of it since he knows the background, just as an assistant, but we do still need someone with experience, obviously. And they're kind of brainstorming ideas, and they say, well, what about Father Lancaster Merrin? And they're like, oh, I thought he was in Iraq. And they're like, well, like he's back now. He's over in Woodstock, New York, writing a book. They're like, well, like, yeah, okay, get word out to him. We'll have him do it because he's done an exorcism before. And like this whole, like a couple decades prior, he did an exorcism that took a full month to complete, and like it almost killed him. Like just how intense it was and everything. We see him out on his walk. We see like a young priest like run up to him and give him like the telegram or the message or whatever, and he reads it. Then cut to him arriving by cab to the MacNeil house at night, and this is where we get the iconic shot from the poster and that everyone is familiar with of the silhouette of the priest standing at the front gate as the light from the window shines through the fog at him. Awesome shot. As soon as he gets in the house and is introducing himself, we hear Regan from upstairs in the deep voice scream his name, Merrin. Then everyone like looks up and like, oh, okay, what's going on? Merrin introduces himself to Father Karras, sends him over to the church to get some supplies that they're going to need for the exorcism. Then, as they're getting ready, after once he gets back, he's giving him like basically like the pep talk for like, okay, here's how it's going to go. Avoid conversation with the demon. The demon is a liar. It's going to mix some truths in there to make you believe what he's saying, but like, don't listen to him. Like, he's a liar. Don't listen. Father Karras asks Father Merrin if he'd like to know some background on the case, and Father Merrin's like, no, like, I don't need to know that. Like, that doesn't matter because it's just all stuff coming from this demon who's lying, so it's not going to help me at all. So then both priests enter the room. We see like again like how cold it is in there. We can see their breath and everything. Father Merrin's taking out his little case with all his little supplies and everything. He takes the cross out, takes the holy water out and everything, and then he just like starts getting right to it. Trying to starts doing the chants and stuff, the rituals. Starts sprinkling the holy water, and right off the bat, Regan, or the demon, I guess, cut like right out the gate. Just stick your cock up her ass, you motherfucking worthless cocksucker. And Merrin's just like ignoring everything she's saying. She vomits on him, but not like nearly as much as she did on Karras. Just like goes like right on his glasses, and he just doesn't even miss a beat. He's just still doing the prayer, still going through it. Just hands his glasses off to Father Karras to clean them. No, doesn't even do that. He just cleans it himself. Like Karras goes to like help him, but realizes like, oh no, he's got it. Just keeps going through the Lord's Prayer, just reciting it over and over again. We see Regan on the bed. She's all tied up at this point too, because she's dangerous. We see like her tongue like all wiggling, like she just keeps he just keeps doing the prayer. Then she's trying to yell at him and like starts yelling at Karras too, because she realizes that Merrin's not as vulnerable, and just starts yelling stuff like, your mother sucks cocks in hell, Karras. And the bed starts to rise and shake and stuff. Karras is like completely stunned once the bed just completely lifts off the ground, like 3-4 feet off the ground. And there's a part that he's supposed to do like the response in the prayer or the ritual, but he's just like too stunned to speak. And like Merrin's like, Father Karras, the response, and then he finally like snaps back into it and keeps going. The bed starts to come back down. Then we see Regan's face change to that same demon face that we saw in the in Father Karras's dream, the like white face. And she's just continuing to yell at them like bastards, and she's growling. And then as like laying laying back into the pillow and like with her head to the side, and then the green slime just starts like spewing out of her mouth like a constant stream. And Father Merrin's just kind of wiping it up, and then they kind of take a short break from the chanting and everything. And then as he's like trying to gather himself, she just starts like laughing and just like ha ha ha, ha. And Merrin like snaps a little bit. Like this like kind of gets to him. I don't know if it is getting to him or if it's just like, okay, like time to take it up a notch, and just like yells like, I cast you out. And he just like jumps up like from laying down and sits up real quick and like shove it up your ass. And then the walls and the ceilings start cracking, and then like going back to the prayer, like, you know, keep chanting and chanting and chanting, and then just like screaming, fuck him, Karis, fuck him. And then we see her head spin a full 360 this time. We saw it go backwards before, but this time we see it go all the way around. And then she starts yelling at Karis, you killed your mother, you left her to die. And then the straps that are on her arms and ankles rip, and she starts like with her arms like spread out in a T pose. She starts floating upward like level, and her eyes are all blank and white, and she's just like floating up slowly. And then this is where we get the famous the power of Christ compels you, like over and over and over again. I think I read that they chanted it 14 times together. Then they start dashing her with the holy water, but as the water's hitting like her ankles, we see the skin like rip, like almost like it's cutting her. But then she's but it's starting to work, and she floats back down, and Father Karras goes to like tie her back up to the bed, but as he's trying to get her ankles, she whacks him over the head and knocks him to the floor, and then the whole room starts to shake like an earthquake, but who knows if it's affecting anything outside of that room, you know. And this knocks both priests to the floor, and while they're down on the floor, we look up at Regan, who is like up on her knees on the bed and kind of like stretching outward, but we only see her silhouette, and then next to her silhouette is the silhouette of the Pazuzu demon statue from Iraq. And Father Merrin clocks this, and it's like, oh my, you know. But so that kind of like freaks him out a little bit. They get her back, tied back to the bed. Then Father Merrin says, okay, like let's rest, and we'll, you know, start again soon, you know. So they're in the hallway, just kind of sitting on the stairs, taking a break in silence. Father Merrin gets up to go to the bathroom, and he's got to take some pills. We saw him take pills in the first scenes. It's not said like what they are. It's probably like some kind of heart medicine. Then Karras goes into the room alone while Father Merrin's in the bathroom. We see that he is seeing not Regan on the bed, but his mom, like sitting in the middle of the bed looking at him. And she's like, damn you, why you do this to me? Why did you leave me? Why did you, you know? And then he's like, you're not my mother. I'm not falling for it. But she just keeps going and going and going. Father Merrin comes back in, and, you know, she's still speaking in his mother's voice. And he finally, it's like too much for him. And he just screams like, you're not my mother. And Father Merrin's like, okay, like get out. Like, you know, it's affecting you too much right now. You need a break. You need more of a break. So get out. So then it's Merrin in there alone with Regan, and he's getting his supplies back out, and he's going to start on his own for now. We see Father Karras downstairs sitting on a bench, and Chris comes out and asks like, is it over? And he just shakes his head no. And then she asks, is she gonna die? And this kind of like gives Father Karras this determination, because he like looks at her like real fast and just like, no, she's not, and gets up and goes back upstairs. Once as he's going upstairs to join back in, we hear the doorbell ring. And this is like late at night, by the way, that this is all happening. And it's Lieutenant Kinderman. We just see him through the crack in the door. Father Karras gets up there. Father Merrin is dead. He is hunched over the bed, just laying there. Regan's like in the corner, like leaned up against the bedpost, just like looking at him and just like staring. And as Father Karras gets Father Merrin off the bed, and he's trying to like revive him, trying to like pounding on his chest, trying to do CPR and stuff. And then Regan just starts giggling. And this is when Karras just snaps, grabs her, throws her on the floor, and just starts like, I think he does like punch her. Punch the demon, but it's still Regan's body. And just like, get out of her, take me instead. And then we see like his face change and like become more demonic and everything. And then we hear Regan's actual voice back, and she's like freaked out. She's like crying and like calling for her mother. Karras like gets up off of her, like gets thrown back, and then we see the demon face like in him, and like he's about to attack Regan, and then he just like is himself again for like a split second and just like fights it and just says no, and then jumps out the window. He jumps through the window. The window's closed, jumps through the glass, hits the stairs, rolls down to the bottom, and then we see him all bloody at the bottom of the stairs. We see Chris run into the room with Lieutenant Kinderman, and they see Regan on the floor. They hear her crying, and then she goes to console, but she's hesitant. She's like, okay, like, is this my daughter? Is she back? And realizes like, okay, like this is her, and starts to comfort her and everything. The lieutenant's like looking at the window, sees all the broken glass and broken everything, and is looking out the window. We see Father Dyer just happens to be nearby, I guess. He sees that it's Father Karras at the bottom of the stairs, who all bloody and everything, and he's very emotional because this is his friend and colleague, and is like doing his last rites with him, like, do you acknowledge that you're a sinner and everything? And then Father Karras can't even talk, so but he is like squeezing his hand to like indicate like yes, and just Father Dyer's like very tearful in this and everything, very shaken. Then we cut to daytime, like it's I'm guessing a few days later at least, if not weeks. We see that the house is all packed up and that they're moving out. Carl's packing the car. Everything, all the furniture's in boxes and everything. Chris asks Sharon, like, are you sure you don't want to come? And then, but without too much detail, one can assume that it's just too traumatized from what happened, and just needs like a break and time for herself probably. So she's not going with them wherever they're moving to. We see Father Dyer waiting outside, watching them get all packed up. Chris sees him and goes to talk to him, and he just says like, how's she doing? How are you doing? And Chris says that Regan doesn't remember anything from it. Regan comes out of the house, goes up and says like, oh, this is Father Dyer, and she says, oh, hello, Father. But then she notices his priest collar. And like, so a part of her does remember, because she has kind of like oh, I need to give this guy a hug, like that she found comfort in that collar, because I think a part of her knows that what Father Karras did for her, and Father Merrin. as she's leaving, she gives Father Dyer, well, Chris gives Father Dyer the necklace that Sharon found up in the room. And I think it was Father Karras's. And she's like, I think he'd want you to have this. Then they drive off away to their new life. And then Father Dyer takes one last look at the stairs and the window that's all boarded up. And he walks off into the distance, and that's it for the movie. So that is The Exorcist. Like I said, just one of my all-time favorite movies in general, not just horror movie. It was a movie that I was afraid to watch for the longest time. Just because I had heard so many stories about like when it came out and people passing out in the theaters and people having to be hospitalized from the trauma that it caused them and stuff. But you go like back further and like that happened to people that saw Frankenstein. So in the 30s. And it's just, everything's you're just affected by the time in which you see something and what the norm is and everything. And I'm sure in many decades, people will look back at Hereditary and be like, oh, like there's some cheesy stuff in there, you know, compared to what we have now. And who knows what that's going to be and how terrifying movies will be in the future. You know, if they are, maybe we did hit the peak, but I doubt it. There's always a way to up the ante without jumping the shark. But yeah, love this movie so much. Actually, like a funny story about like one of the first times I watched it. Not the very first time, but I think the second time I watched it. I rented it right around when I think it was the day I graduated high school. And I had some friends staying over at my house. And one was fully down to watch the movie and the other one was not. He's like, nope, I don't want to watch that. But we waited late enough and he's like, okay, like you guys watch the movie. I'm just going to go to sleep. I got my iPod because this was back when it was iPod pre-iPhone. And so I'm just going to put my headphones in, turn the other way and go to sleep while you guys watch the movie. So we watch it, we enjoy it. Movie's over and we decide like, okay, like, you know, as we wind down, let's put on like Comedy Central and I'll put the sleep timer on. So that way we just fall asleep to this and then the TV's not on all night. So we do that. We fall asleep, me and the friend who watched the movie. And then my other friend who didn't watch the movie, he wakes up, realizes, okay, the movie's over. It's safe for me. Takes his headphones out and is watching whatever stand-up special was on Comedy Central at the time. And as he's watching it, he has no idea that I've turned the sleep timer on. And he is just watching TV and it all of a sudden turns off. And right as the TV turns off, an old grandfather clock that only worked sometimes that we had in the house chimed 3 times at 3 a.m. And he was just freaked out at this. Like, he's like, oh my God, they watched this evil movie and then all this, like, the devil's here in the house, like, coming for me. And like, he told us in the morning, and I'm like, oh, and I just explained everything and we just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I always think about that. And probably anytime I watch a scary movie, but especially when I watch The Exorcist. And yeah, that story just always makes me happy to think about. That memory always makes me happy. So yeah, thanks for bearing with me through this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed my little story at the end. And I hope you guys are enjoying the podcast in general. Please follow on Instagram at movies they're pretty good with no punctuation in there. It's just the words spelled out as is. But yeah, hope you guys keep listening. Got one more scary movie for you coming out on Halloween Day. Wonder what movie that's going to be. And then back to some normal ones, and then the Christmas ones or holiday in general in the month of December. December holidays only. Not going to do like a Halloween one in December. So yeah, thanks for listening, and hope you stick around, and hope you keep listening next week. Thanks. Bye.